All right, everybody, thank you for coming. If we can get the door closed, thank you for wonderful B-Sides. Thank you for being here for our very last talk. We have an awesome talk on busting biases in Infosec. And everybody's probably heard my spiel about please keep your cell phones off, please don't record things because we're recording it for you. If you have questions at the end, try to speak up. You'll repeat them. If not, you can always come up to the mic. I'm going to get out of your hair and out of your way so we can hear this talk.
Cool. So, who answers to the pronoun I or you? And don't raise your hand. That was good. I didn't expect that. Well, what's really funny is that I said you at that point. And there were multiple people who rose their hands. All of you identified as part of that you, even though I was talking to a group. Isn't that interesting? But if I say, who answers to the pronoun I or you, the rest of you, your brains just went, they're not talking about me now. He's talking about that person. And this gentleman here said, well, he's not talking about the rest of everyone, he's talking about me. There was a part in your brain that clicked on and off without you having to analyze what I was saying, think about it. There was something in your brain that just clicked and said, that's me. What was that? You see, over the course of millennia and hundreds of millennia that we've existed as a species, but as far as brains have existed throughout millions of years, evolution has essentially crafted our brains to develop patterns. And these patterns have done all kinds of things for us, mostly around survival, right? If your brain doesn't develop a pattern to identify the rustling trees and the rustling bushes as possibly dangerous, there may be a bear or tiger or something back there going to eat me, I need to get out of here, you probably didn't survive long enough to pass on your genes, and therefore your brain functions. The people who did develop patterns and the animals that did develop patterns to react and to be able to form those split second, they're not thinking about it, it's just the instinct, that gut feeling. Those are the ones that survived. And so these brain patterns exist, and these brain patterns persist even today. And even walking in and sitting down, I've already shown how you've already made a couple little assumptions there. But even walking around, you've already seen by processing sensory input about what's going on up here with me, you've already made assumptions, you may not realize it. For instance, you may think that I can see you right now. I can kind of see these people up here. I can't see really the rest of you. You're a blur. And it would really help if I wore my glasses. These aren't my glasses. These are some empty frames. Now, how many of you thought those were my real glasses? There may have been a few of you. You didn't think about that. You didn't go, oh, I have glasses, and you can probably see with those. Your brain matched a pattern, made an assumption, did not arise in your consciousness to see that. But now, when I did that just now, put my fingers through the frames and revealed that, for those that didn't know, it probably twinged you a bit like, oh wow, I got tricked. Just a little bit. It's not a huge trick, but it's a little trick, courtesy of the great James Randi. But you probably had a little bit of, wow, something happened there. That something happening there is your brain going, wow, my pattern didn't work. I need to develop a new one. And so now your brain's already saying we need, just like a sim rule, a sim alert, you're already starting to slightly adjust your pattern. Maybe I should see if there's some kind of reflection in the lenses before I just assume someone has glasses on. Or maybe your brain just goes, well, you know what, this was a weird one-off situation, and I don't need to develop a pattern for that. Whatever. But your brain is raising alarms. Now the question is you didn't do a thing about that. You didn't decide for any of those things to happen to you. They happened to you. So the real question is what choice did you really have over any of that? Thanks for coming to this talk. My name is Oddjob, and I am a co-founder, board member, and CEO of Circle CityCon. And I've been hacking for 10 years. In fact, it's really interesting. My first DEF CON was DEF CON 20. Noob! So that's been really fun to be able to speak at BSidesLV's 9th year. So I'm very happy to have that. I also work for Fortune 500 as a cyber resiliency director. And Just a fair warning, I am not a psychologist. I am not a neurologist. I've just learned from some of them, but I am no way trained. Uh-oh. I am being approached. I need an adult.
It's okay, I'm not a roving bartender. I am an evil fairy, and I believe you requested
Oh my goodness.
along these lines?
It is perhaps possible that I did. Actually, I forgot I requested this. Oh, wow. All right, well, you're going to get Malort face through this whole talk. That's true. It keeps going too, like you know how like a wine kind of develops? That just kind of, yeah, it's glorious. And there also may be some advice that I give that might be considered somewhat of a legal nature, but I'm not a lawyer and I'm not giving legal advice. Go talk to your lawyers about some stuff that you may find legally, I don't know, suggestive later. So here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about base assumptions about our brains, because that's where our base assumptions come from, right? And then we're going to talk about some biases and fallacies and what those are functionally within our brains, what those are. And we're going to talk about how bias arises in Infosec. So how do we see biases in our everyday lives, including in our jobs, especially when we're trying to convince people to maybe do certain things or not do certain things. We may have to help them overcome their bias, and we need to overcome our own on various levels. And then we're going to talk a little bit about things you can do to help mitigate or kind of start on a path to notice and mitigate your own biases. And there's some junk down at there at the bottom of this slide. Don't know where that came from, but so let's get back to this, because we didn't answer that question, did we? Who answers the pronoun I or you? Well, again, it's all about brain patterns. And the real question is, what are you? Yeah, you're the meat suit, but like, what are you? So what is generating the you-ness? That sounds like woo, but we're going to get into consciousness here. So I want you to take a moment to hold something in your hand. Could be your badge, could be a can of something. And I want you to feel it, like there's some texture maybe there. Maybe there's a corner. If it's a Coke can, don't like cut yourself on any of the thin metal. But yeah, just kind of carefully and think about that, notice what's happening. Now, it's interesting because the sensations you're receiving obviously are the touch, but the quality of those sensations that are going on in your brain right now, you have no control over. Those are things your brain are just doing for you. It's popping up in consciousness. Everything you're noticing about your badge. By the way, you now have a better understanding and feeling for your badge than you probably did 5 seconds ago. None of that is your decision. You're not making any decisions about what's going on right now with how you're thinking and the way your brain is right now formulating what it thinks and what it's doing with this. So this is very important to kind of understand. So the other question I want to ask is, essentially, make sure I have it on the right slide there. Okay. So the other question I want to ask you is, I want you to think of a song that you like. Now, you notice I put some patterns in there, or some pauses in there. One of the most interesting pauses was between song and you like. How many of you, when I said song, immediately thought of some kind of song? Okay. Was it a song you liked? Okay. Someone said no. That's interesting, because your brain actually does like to remember negative experiences more than positive. But if you've listened to that song loads and loads and loads of time, that pattern may override the negative pattern. So that's interesting. But the point I'm getting at is you didn't choose what song popped into your head. You didn't go, of the library of music that I'm aware of in my my Apple downloads. That's the song I want to choose. Your brain said, brr, Dua Lipa, right? Something. That was it? Okay, awesome. I'm a mentalist. So, but you've got that. You did not choose to select that song. Of any choice we could possibly think we really make in life, that should be a choice we think we should be able to make, because it's completely within us. It has nothing to do, we think, with the outside world. But let me ask you another question. How many of you think if we were to go back just however long it takes to go back to the time before I asked that question, and you know nothing about what has happened over the last 30 seconds, how many think you would have chosen a different song? Neurology tells us you wouldn't. Your brain state would be in the exact same space as when I asked that question. And because it was, and the circumstances are the same, given everything's equal, you would come up with the exact same thing. Now, if I were to ask it, you'd come up with a load of other things. But again, you're now in a different brain state. Okay. So what control do we really have over our minds then? We don't know. We actually don't know this. This is something that's very not misunderstood, but there's just not a lack of knowledge in there. A lot of the things that I've just triggered in you to think about don't lie at the high level of consciousness. Because you could review your choice and be like, I think I actually really like this song more. You could do that. And to that level, maybe you have a choice. But that gut instinct, you did not have that choice. So really, what I want to now talk about are biases. Because biases live in that world that we just dove into in your mind. It's that part that you don't really have a control over, especially the implicit bias portion. So let me help you understand this. So biases are a prejudice in favor of or against something. People, objects, ideas. An explicit bias is something that you would admit. It's something self-reported. It's essentially a belief you hold. For instance, a very common, well, I won't say common, but probably commonly known bias. Someone might say, well, I believe men and women are equal. But women are built differently and their minds work differently, so therefore they're not suited for certain positions. And you know what? Men aren't really people. They're not suited for that. They're analytical, so they really shouldn't stay at home and do any of that kind of work because they're men. They're just built differently. We're equal, but we're just built differently. That bias is an explicit bias. It is self-reported. Implicit bias is not something you would even know to admit to. It's not a belief you maybe even know you have. An implicit bias, though, does affect your decision making because it's in that unconscious part of the brain that we just went into. And it's something that you don't necessarily become aware of until someone kind of does something like this to make you aware of where this is. Which actually is funny because there's some HTTP not found, so maybe there's something fun there. So an idea of an implicit bias, for instance. So there were some name studies that have been done. A very interesting name study that was done is, I forget which institution did this, but they essentially submitted loads of applications to job postings. And essentially what they did is they had job postings and they had applications. And they had some male-sounding names, and they had some female-sounding names, they had some culturally white, European-sounding names, they had some culturally black-sounding names, some Latino-sounding names, Asian-sounding names, and I know that's an entire continent, so there's all kinds of different names that can go there. But they did this, they sent this to people, but then you know what else they did? They took some of the same resumes and just switched the names. And they were judged differently. Just because of the name. They didn't go, oh, well, that has to be, this person, so I'm not going to do that. They may not have had that going on in their brain at the top level, but at the bottom level, there was something about the name that biased them at the implicit level against that resume and caused them to downscore that. Now, it's not like there's a 50% difference in scoring. But it still is significant enough to where you won't get a callback. In fact, I remember as an anecdote, there was someone who was trying to apply to Target, and she's black. She changed her name to a male and a white-sounding name, and sure enough, got a callback immediately. That's an anecdote. Plural of anecdote is not data. But definitely the singular anecdote is not data either. But that's just another illustration further of this phenomena that we have, this implicit bias. And by the way, this wasn't just men that were reviewing the resumes, this was also women. So this is something that we all actually can have within us. Something else I want to talk about is fallacies. And in order to understand fallacies just a little bit, there's two things that you need to understand about reasoning. This is a syllogism. It's a way of essentially arguing and laying out an argument to where you can say by the time the conclusion is stated that yes, this is true. So let's look at this. Premise 1, all humans are mortal. Premise 2, odd job is a human. Conclusion, odd job is mortal. Okay. There's two things that have to be correct in order for this to not only be a true conclusion, but a reasonable conclusion. First of all, the premises have to be true. Now, we could go and talk about whether there are any immortal humans walking amongst us. If any of you are 25 and there are actually 25,000, please let me know. We want to run tests on you and keep you in a lab in Area 51. But if we do know there are immortal beings on this earth. There's like little microscopic hydra that literally don't age and don't die. Their cells reproduce perfectly every time. Jellyfish are immortal. They don't die. They just die when a sea turtle eats them for spaghetti. You know, that's what I was watching a video that the other day. I said, "This is beautiful." Oh wow, this is actually horrifying, depending on the perspective. So the premises look like they're true. Great, but not only that, it has to follow. Now, what do I mean by follow? Well, we could also say odd job is mortal, which we all agreed upon in the last syllogism. We could say all humans are mortal, which again, we agreed the premise of the last one, but can we say odd job is a human because of the first two premises? Well, I could be a dog and still be immortal, right? So it does not follow just because odd job is immortal, and just because all humans are mortal, it doesn't therefore follow that odd job is human, even if the premises are true. So there's those two different things about logic that you got to understand here. Fallacious reasoning happens also at that base level, that bias level, that implicit level of the brain to a degree. Kind of hops up a little bit between implicit and explicit bias. But essentially, those things really mess with your day-to-day, especially if you deal with data a lot, because coming to conclusions is a very important thing. And not everyone develops everything into syllogistic form in order to do that. You can't live life that way. You can't live life in a syllogism. But I want to talk about some biases now, because that's why we all came here, right? We came here to learn about biases. We've learned a little about the human brain. We've learned about how we have these vulnerabilities, biases, some fallacies, some fallacious reasoning. That's built in. That's hardwired. I want to see the software bill of materials for our brains, because we got some dependencies that are rotten. I'm sure a few people have probably seen this image, okay? This is a World War II study that was done during the war. Essentially, these are bombers that came back from their missions, and essentially the Allies wanted to take a look and see, hey, do we need to beef up armor on our bombers? So they took data points. Each one of those bullet holes represents a bullet hole and location on a bomber that came back in this study. And what ended up happening is they mapped them onto just this image here to show where the bullet holes are. And they asked a pool of experts, where do you think we should spend the time, effort, money, resources, manufacturing power, beefing up the armor or something with those locations? And most of the experts said, well, obviously, the main fuselage is getting hit, the wingtips are getting hit, and way back there on the tail wing, we're getting some hits, so probably want to focus on those areas. Because they're getting hit a lot. You know, bullets are going through, so that's not a good thing. Another expert said, we need to take a look at everything that doesn't have a bullet hole and armor that up. Because what's missing is not only the bullet holes, but what's missing from the study is the planes that didn't come back. And where do you think those bullet holes might be if we would have been able to measure them? This is what's known as survivorship bias, where you're not considering the data you don't have and what that might tell you about what decision you should be making. So they went and armored up the engine, the cockpit area, the back tail fuselage, and I think they even maybe did some of the forward wings. More planes came back. Imagine that. And they had bullet holes in those areas. So there you go. You know it works. Hooray, bullets. Or they didn't have holes, but they saw dents, right? They saw it was working. So hooray, bullet holes. So survivorship bias does exist, not just in this model, but essentially when we talk about successful people, for instance, if you've ever seen a slow media cycle during a week, you've probably seen like CNBC or someone say, oh, hey, here's 9 successful habits of successful people. And if you emulate these habits, you're going to be successful too. Sounds right. Sounds like it should follow, right? Odd job is mortal. Humans are mortal. Therefore, odd job is human. Wait. So, what is happening there is those successful people are waking up at like 4 a.m. They're doing exercise for an hour every day. They're reading a book. They're taking a half hour just to think. And you know what? That's cool, and that may be good for you. But is that what made them successful? We're looking at the people who have already survived and risen to the top, or sufficiently high to call them successful, whatever in this capitalist world. And we see that, and we say, great, we need to emulate that. But what we're missing are all the people who emulated those exact same factors and qualities and didn't make it. Maybe those criteria are not the criteria that we should be making our decisions on. Maybe these criteria are not the criteria we should be making our decisions on about who to hire, who is successful, and how do you become successful. Very similar into how we write our job descriptions. Do we need 30 years of experience for an architect? Right? No. No, we don't, because there's plenty of people who only have 5 or 6, maybe even 8, or who knows how many. That's trivial. That's not what you're trying to get at. You're trying to get at what can they actually do? What do they actually know? And some of that's hard, right? And we're trying to put things into a job description to try and judge people on something we feel like we can control and know. But I've met people who've had 30 years of experience. They don't really know much. And I've met people who have a couple of years under their belt. Oh my gosh. Like they're brilliant. And I've met everybody in between, right? I think we all have. We even go back to the study that we talked about, the name study. One of the things we can actually do to limit survivor bias, especially in the hiring process, is taking a look at removing things that are not good criteria in the job description, but when the intake comes in, removing things like names, because that triggers a bias. Now, we can't necessarily control that bias or even be conscious of it all the time. So a mitigation in that case is to completely just remove it. Remove the name. You don't need it. The name is trivial to knowing whether someone's qualified, right? What about college names? If you even require a college degree, but let's say you don't, and people still put that on there. You should be proud of your college, I think. But if you're kind of a person that says, well, MIT, that's fantastic. Well, guess what? Who goes to MIT? And what are you going to end up selecting for? Probably people who are white, probably people who are male, cis, abled, on and on and on we could go. You're leaving out historically black colleges, you're leaving out women's colleges, you're leaving out community colleges where people who can't afford to go to Harvard and MIT, they weren't in there. But if we say MIT is the success level, we're leaving out everybody else. And that's killing us on our survivorship bias there. And we're losing on a lot of candidates. And I bet that job gap goes from this to this at least if we just did those two things alone. And of course, I always recommend don't even interview people until you know the pool of people in the resume pile are diverse. You know, if you have 100 applicants and only 10 are non-cis, white, male, you know, on and on and on, then you don't have probably a sufficiently diversified candidate pool. Go find more people, outreach, do things like that. You don't have to select specifically for that, but you have the pool that you pull from and can review. It's more likely you're going to get a good sample of people from the population, which that feeds into selection bias, not a part of this talk today. So the other bias that I want to talk about real quick is confirmation bias, the solution in search of a problem. Or the conclusion in search of evidence, maybe. So essentially, confirmation bias is you formed a conclusion for some reason. It could even be just a gut feeling you have because you're an expert and you've been in security for 15 years and you just know when you see this, it means this, and you're just going to run with it. But you know, you think this is a DOS attack and you're going to have to get some evidence. And so you go and look for the evidence that confirms a DOS attack. And if you're going to do that, what the confirmation bias happens is if you have this bias, you start rejecting, and we all do this honestly to some degree or another, we start either ignoring data we see that is contrary to our conclusion we started out with, or we outright reject it. We go, no. And so we may have a little bit of evidence that we might even go so far as to stretch its validity towards the conclusion, to say, yeah, no, you're wrong, mountain of evidence. I have this little grain of evidence here and I'm good. That's a confirmation bias. Going on Google, seeing all the studies that say you're wrong, and then finding that one that says you're right, and going like, there we go, got what I came for. I actually had to fight against that for this talk. I have confirmation bias, and I had to fight against that. In fact, I ripped even a part of this talk because I thought I had selection bias correct, and I didn't. And I actually searched a good while looking for my thought, and everything kept coming up, and I'm like, you know what? I'm talking about confirmation bias too. And this is a confirmation bias, and I'm actually going to call it out because we do this all the time when we research. There's always that little thing that says, nah, don't pay attention to that. You already got what you came for. You really should. And so what we should do when we come up with confirmation bias is we should actively seek out ideas, conclusions that are the direct opposite of what we're talking about, and try to look for, how could I be wrong? What would that look like? Test for that. It's kind of like in threat hunting. You have your hypothesis. You go look for the bad action that matches that hypothesis. But before you drop to the conclusion, it's kind of the scientific method. You do look for other explanations. You do look for other things that describe this behavior before going off and saying the world's on fire. People aren't going to like you very much if confirmation bias causes you a false alarm. There's the curse of knowledge bias, and I bet you everyone in this room has the curse of knowledge bias in them. So this says there's a tendency for well-informed individuals to find it hard to think about problems from the perspective of poorly formed individuals. I got it right. I remembered it now. So MFA is actually, I'm going to use this twice, but MFA is a really good example of this. So multi-factor authentication, we all know why we should have multi-factor authentication, or at least we should. Maybe varying degrees of us do. We may even know why we need certain types of multi-factor authentication. Maybe SMS isn't good enough, right? So we have all that. But when you're talking about users, they're not stupid. They're not informed. They don't know what you know. They don't know how bad you can really damage their personal life, the company through them, and everything else. They don't know. And so what they're seeing is, I have a username, I have a password, and now I got this thing on my phone that I got to do just so I can do my job. And that's the way they see it. And this is a bias that's troublesome for us because when we're not thinking about people who are especially not in our own groups, let alone just limited knowledge, we're possibly pushing things that are not necessarily harmful to people, but inconvenient, and might also hurt our ends, which is adoption. We want everyone to adopt MFA. So instead of maybe pounding the hammer, maybe we bring not so well-informed people into the discussion. We learn from them. We talk with them, because now we're listening to things that don't already support our well-informed perspective. And then we come to this middle point where we go, aha, let's deploy this way instead. It's more convenient. It's better for the user for their use cases. Better adoption. More security. Yeah, we like that. That's good stuff. Can't always do that. Sometimes it's just impractical and expensive to do either way. But just know there is a curse of knowledge bias, and there is a way to override that. There's also the status quo and system justification bias. These two go hand in hand. They love each other. So status quo bias is we just love things the way they are. If it suits us, of course. If it doesn't suit us, well, you obviously don't like things the way they are. But especially people who are benefited by the way the things are, they tend to like things. And system justification bias ensures that they don't want to change. And they will not only just go like, well, that's the way it's always been, but they'll say, well, we can't change it because, and then they'll go through a list of things to say why they can't change it, totally disregarding maybe the reasons you're giving them to say, well, it's more expensive to do it this way. It's not scalable. It's not deployable. It's expensive, but it's going to cost a lot in the short run, right? But it's going to cost a lot less in the long run, right? You have to be able to get over that bias by understanding and getting someone to understand that things don't have to be just the way they've always been. And that's actually very hard to get people to realize, because as things get more close to person, like business is business, but when it starts becoming personal and dogma and things that we all hold very strongly, we don't like giving it up. Our brain just goes like, no, don't want to give it up, because it's what helps me survive. It's that rustling bush, and I need to make sure I keep safe. And I've been building my brain for over 30 years, and so those patterns are set. It loves that. It's going to take me a while to get new patterns going, but this one's kind of hard to help overcome for other people. But just be aware of it yourself. You may also have status quo bias, and you may also have status justification bias that you need to overcome yourself. Prevention bias. This is actually really cool. As I was looking at biases, this is an Infosec bias specifically. So there's a study, and you can go read it. It's from 2021, and it's the prevention bias. And essentially, the prevention bias says when investing money to protect against risks, decision makers perceive that $1 spent on prevention buys more security than $1 spent on timely detection and response, even when investing in either option is equally effective. So if you have a situation where dollar for dollar, it's equally effective, they're going to say, nope, we need more prevention because that's better. Thank you, Gartner Magic Quadrant people in the prevention sector who have been telling everyone, don't detect, you need prevention. You need both. And so this is actually a bias that exists, and we've probably dealt with this all. And some of us may have this bias too, or have had it at some point, or maybe you've overcome some of it. This one is a little bit more of an explicit bias, because it's a belief. Well, prevention is better than detection. That is an explicit bias. So that's a little easier to overcome. We go, well, is it really? Here's actually some data that shows this may not actually be the case all the time. And you may have to show and do some extra work to help someone understand and get over this bias. No, we're doing detection and response now. We've got plenty of prevention investment. We need to start doing detection and response in a timely manner. There's also the Peltzman Effect, which is also known as the risk compensation effect. And this is the tendency to take greater risk when perceived safety increases. So let's say we have MFA deployed. The company loves it. Great, awesome. Our prevention's way up. We notice attacks are way down. The incidents are way down. This is fantastic. We love it. Oh, by the way, we just went and signed up for a third-party SaaS provider, and we didn't really go and look at the terms and conditions or see if they were cloud certified by anybody, questionnaires. We didn't pay attention to any of that. But you know what? We saw that they had MFA, and we have MFA, and we can use our MFA up there, and that's great. So it's secure, right? So we can go ahead and put our most sensitive trade secret and proprietary data up there and trust that, right? And you go, we didn't put MFA in place so that you could go and take bigger risks. We put mitigations and safety in place to take care of the risks you are taking. Now we have to go through and assess this new model and go, here's what we got to do to protect this risk and to ensure this risk event doesn't happen. So that's a little bit of biases on an individual level. There's a lot more we can go into. Oh my gosh, there were DNS Princess knows, there were so many that I wanted to go through, and they were just like, no, you're not gonna have time. And I was like, no, you're right, I'm not gonna have time. So how to patch, because patching is everything, right? Patch all the things. So this is not easy. There's no prescription for this. This is kind of a conglomeration of various things I was able to read that people have found effective over time. This can be used for other people, it can be used for yourself, but awareness of biases. Even just attending this talk already, you are now aware of biases. I even went a little extra and helped make you aware of what's going on in your brain and swim around there and kind of understand that. Maybe made you have an existential moment where you're like, am I the driver of the meat suit? Do I really make decisions? Neurology doesn't know, so just assume you do for now. It's better that way. Agency is a good thing. That's a bias, explicit. So anyway, awareness is always your first step. So, and there's some online tools. I was actually going across Harvard. They have very specific explicit biases that you can go and test for, and they'll tell you what are some maybe implicit biases that are feeding into some of your beliefs around like vaccines or politics or just things around society and you know, hell, interracial marriage and everything like that. Like there's all kinds of issues that they bring up that people have biases over, both explicit and implicit, and you can maybe identify some of those in you. So invite feedback. Inviting feedback is so important. You know, it's overcoming that confirmation bias that, hey, I'm actually doing okay because I saw this one thing one time. Or, you know, the data says this, but I have this one friend who told me this thing, and so I know I'm right. There's some familiarity bias there too. Another one. I got another one in. But getting other feedback is very important. And groups that are outside of your social groups are certainly very important. Also, don't be defensive. Most of the time, what we're talking about is actually implicit biases. They're the hardest to detect. The one that you're going to be like, what? I believe that is the implicit bias. The one that surprises you is going to be the implicit bias. Don't get defensive. Your brain is going to want to do that, by the way. It's going to be like, oh my gosh, fight or flight. This is not okay. It's okay. The world's not going to fall. The sky's not going to fall. The world's not going to burn, at least not today. Maybe in 50 years. But you don't have to defend your implicit biases because as we talked about at the beginning parts of the talk, you don't really control those. You just have those. And you've learned those over time or they've been wired into your brain. That's just the way it is. But becoming aware of them is very important. So be open to understanding why you act or make decisions the way you do. You can make better decisions. And fourth, be on the lookout for contradictory beliefs and actions. Like I said, there's implicit biases that are a direct contradiction of your explicit beliefs. Whenever you see that, notice, wow, we've got a bias somewhere. If you have two opposing beliefs that you believe, and someone points that out and you go, wait, what? That's something going on. One of those is based probably on or both are based on an implicit bias of some kind. And guess what? Your brain will let you believe both of those things that can't be true are true. Cognitive dissonance. Your brain's survival mechanism to make sure you don't freak out about things that it thinks is good for your survival. So be sure to work on overcoming that. And not all biases are negative. You can have a bias that kind of is positive about something. Maybe instead of more of a pessimistic bias, it's an optimistic bias. It's still a bias nonetheless. Instead of underreporting, you overreport. Instead of underestimating, you overestimate. You misunderestimate. You misoverestimate. And so be aware of that. So sometimes you might go, well, that's okay. Well, no, it's not. Investigate it. See what it's about. Because again, that bias is that little shortcut your brain's making. It's that little vulnerability in your brain that may not be helping you make the best decisions. So, I'm Odd Job. My YouTube is Glass of 0J. You can get me on Twitter at 0DDJ0BB. You can actually get on my GitLab, and maybe some of the stuff at the bottom of the screen made sense for any of you. There will also be these slides up on my GitLab, so you can go check that out. I've got a blog I don't maintain anymore, but go ahead and go see it. It's got 2 posts on it. And of course, go check out CircleCityCon.org. It's happening September 16th through the 18th. So, does anyone have any questions? I'll try to listen really carefully and repeat them. Or comments or anything. Criticisms, feedback. You're totally wrong. Oh. Did you have one? Oh, okay. I saw the eyes squint and my brain went, oh, he may have a question. You know what? I told you, Dunning-Kruger effect was one I was wanting to do. Very similar to the, go back to it. Curse of knowledge bias. Very similar to the curse of knowledge bias. The Dunning-Kruger effect. It's kind of when you start out and you get a little bit of experience, you greatly overestimate the amount that you know. And as you get more experience, you come off Mount Stupid, it's called. It probably shouldn't be called that. But it goes down, and you kind of start realizing, okay, I don't know a lot of things. And then you might start realizing, oh yeah, I actually do know quite a bit of things. There's a lot of us down here in this little thing that we don't think we know a lot, but we really do. But also, you can't really tell them from noobs because they'll underreport their these people will report their knowledge correctly. We underreport our knowledge when we don't think we know a lot. But then the people up on the top of the mountain here who think they know a lot also report the same amount of knowledge that real experts do. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is very, very similar, and it kind of is that. And then there's, of course, imposter syndrome for the people down here. So, yeah. Yeah, exactly. You said it applies to everybody in here? Yeah, it is. Imposter syndrome is probably applied to everybody in here at some point in your career. Unless you're an absolute noob, then welcome. Welcome, you're about to have it. Maybe not. You'll get through it. It'll be fine. You know, you're going to do well. It's great. We all got here. We all got where we are. We're awesome people. So, question.
Well, it's more of a statement. In the risk prevention bias,
Yes.
one of the better examples I've seen is when you're ABS braking in cars, automatic seatbelts, automatic braking, people are now tailgating so much closer and so much more aggressively and speaking about it.
So the Peltzman Effect is named because Peltzman had a study in the 70s that actually studied traffic incidents and studied a behavior mechanism where as people started putting airbags and seatbelts into cars, people were starting to, although it did dramatically reduce fatalities of cars, over time it has increased people's feeling of safety. They have perceived safety. So they're going to take greater risks than they would have if they didn't have those safety mechanisms in place. The argument that originally was trying to be made through that, though, is, so we shouldn't put any safety mechanisms in place. Okay, we all laughed. But did you laugh because your bias made you laugh? Or did you laugh because you understand? So maybe that'll be an interesting thing to walk off there. But yeah. Any others? I like the comment. That was good. I like a discussion as well. What's Glass of Zero J? Glass of Zero J is my YouTube channel. I just pontificate on Infosec stuff. I did stuff like hiring. If you want seniors, you need to hire juniors. Don't stop fish testing. Like, I literally think you should stop doing that. Go see my video for that. Anyway, enough shameless self-promotion. But yeah, go check out the YouTube channel. It's fun. I try to do a video every week. So I just posted one Monday. There'll be another one next Monday. Probably about this talk, actually. Question assumptions. So how to question assumptions. Okay, that's good. I think, so various approaches, right? So depending on what your assumption is, I think it's important to seek out, again, things that go against those assumptions. You have a conclusion. You believe it to be true. What would it take for you to believe that it's not true? Think about that, right? And that's the way you can start taking a look at that and seeing, and is there evidence out there to indicate maybe I am not? And you know what? It may not even be a situation where you adopt somebody else's conclusion. There is a third option. Between true, something can either be true or not true. So we're going back to logic. Something can either be true or not true. That is non-contradiction, identity, excluded middle. Except there is a third option that has nothing to do with logic. It's simply, I don't know. And so many times we're afraid to say, I don't know, and our bias fills in the blank. And that's where some of those assumptions can come through. So being comfortable saying, I don't know, is probably a good step too. How much more time do we have? 12 minutes? Well, I've got nothing else, honestly. But if y'all want to talk or say something, feel free. But to everyone at home and everything, great to see you. But this talk is over. Go to the website. There may be, by the way, on GitLab/OddJob, there may be a puzzle contest for some of the slides that you saw in here, and it may give you a free ticket to Circle CityCon. So, and the slides are up there, so you can go back and check the slides and join in the puzzle. First three people to put their correct solutions in, one correct solution per person, and your first solution will be the one that's judged, unless you use multiple email addresses, which, anyway. Yeah, we'll give away 3 free tickets to 3 correct submitters. The first ones to get it in will be there, and I'm deleting information of everybody after the contest is over, so I'm not keeping your data.
Where is Circle City Con based?
Hey, Circle City Con is based in Indianapolis, the Circle City. Thank you very much. Southeast of the Windy City and northwest of the Queen City, Cincinnati. And southwest of the Summit City, Fort Wayne. Summit City? Oh, it's September 16th through the 18th. Tickets available. And they're going up in price on the 15th. There you go. Enough other con things and enough self-promotion. Thanks, everyone. Hope your B-Sides your B-Sides Las Vegas was great. And enjoy your closing ceremonies. Hope you won some stuff at the auctions.